Good morning and welcome to Stand Up to Anti-Black Hate. My name is Capri Maddox, Executive Director of the Civil, Human Rights and Equity Department, also known as LA Civil Rights. As we continue to celebrate and honor African American Heritage Month in the city of Los Angeles, we are also taking this moment to call attention to the crisis of anti-Black hate. Last year, Los Angeles saw the most hate crimes among any large city, driven primarily against attacks on African Americans. Nationally, hate crimes against African Americans jumped 91% last year. It's the highest seen in decades. Mayor Eric Garcetti and city leaders have made it a priority to expand hate crime reporting resources, including the LA for All campaign. But anti-Black hate has a long history in this country, and it's worth unpacking on its own. To help us explore this issue, we have Dominique Diprima, a radio personality and producer and host of First Things First with Dominique Diprima on KBLA 1580. It airs from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. And we also have Robert Sausedo, who serves as the president and CEO of Community Build, a community-based organization in South Los Angeles, celebrating 30 years of service this year. And we have Commissioner Anthony Mack, who is the president of the Los Angeles Human Relations Commission, which is a part of the Civil Rights Department. Thank you, panel, for joining us today. Robert, let's start with you. You have been on the front lines of empowering communities and supporting South Los Angeles for many years. How do you make sense of this current rise of hate?
You know, I gave a lot of thought to this question, and the question I come up with is, are we seeing a rise, or are we seeing a rise in tracking the impacts and things that are happening through social media? So I think it's a bit of both. And what I would attribute it to is, if you consider the Trump administration a vessel going through the water at a high speed, there's still a rippling effect that administration left around hate. And with that came folks who made a decision that they wanted to forget that good manners are always in style. And so the hate that was within folks, they started to act upon. And then we're seeing more of that across the country. I think folks have gone from a period of our time where we watched us go from truth to the concept of alternative facts. And so what is good is now evil, and what is evil has become good. Mm-hmm. And I know I sound like a preacher right now because I am one, but I want us to recognize that this increase in hate, if you think about folks who are demonstrating that kind of behavior, most of them have never even had folks at their dinner table that they're targeting. So the rise is the fact that we are tracking it better. We're seeing it in the media through all platforms, whether it's television, social media, or otherwise, and now it's creating the discussion about how do we and what should we do, both as a community and the global community, do about our own humanity when it comes to this situation.
Oh, thank you for that. And I really want to get a sense of what Community Build does, and how people facing hate and discrimination can be supported by your organization.
Certainly. So Community Build is a legacy African American organization that came out as a result of the civil unrest in 1992. So we're coming upon our 30th year this April. We provide a broad spectrum of services ranging from the Mayor's Grid program, gang reduction and youth development. I refer to gang members as street culture involved individuals, so they stay out of the way of the RICO Act. We also deal with prevention and intervention in that regard, so youth 10 to 15 years old. We have a safe passage program where we help 30,000 kids make it to and from school safely, as well as a community safety initiative in CD 8 and 9, where we do that for parks as well. We're embarking upon some social enterprises. We're in the housing development business. And then during COVID, we also facilitated the launch of the community response system of South LA, where we literally organized over 32 agencies and stakeholders to come together and share resources and have mutual aid. And to date, we have distributed over 30 million pounds of food, thousands of computers, a number of education and academic support systems. So I'm very proud of the work that the people at Community Build and our network is doing around collaboration.
You do amazing work and you walk the talk. Thank you for that. Dominique, next question is for you. I don't think that a lot of people, a lot of the majority of hate crimes committed in California were committed against African Americans. I don't think a lot of people knew that that was happening. And I think, there may be a bias on how anti-Black hate is covered in the media. What are your thoughts to that? You're in the media.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. The thing that several things I'm concerned about with this. When you look at the way we deal with African Americans, not just in the media, but historically, it's almost like we expect African Americans to be enslaved, abused, killed on TV, and that our bodies are somehow less valuable, so it's less shocking. I just don't think you would see the police killings repeated over and over and over again, those videos in the media, if it was any other ethnic group of people. So if you look at the issue of hate crimes, while I'm happy to see awareness around anti-Semitism and the API hate, which of course we stand in solidarity with those communities, the way it's reported, it's like now everyone is attacking the Jewish American community and the Asian American community, and Black people are fine. And sometimes we're even portrayed as the sole attackers, when many times we see those videos on YouTube or whatever. Those are mentally ill people. Those do not represent the mainstream of African American people or thinkers. Most of us stand in solidarity against hate with Asian Americans, with Jewish Americans. And so I think it's almost like killing Black people, lynching Black people, attacking Black people is the default. So we don't need to comment on that. And that is problematic, because that is the complete normalization of the destruction of our community. And that's not okay. I'm so glad you're doing this program. I haven't heard any panel discussions like this. This is just really so needed, and I thank you for doing it, because I think we have to really call ourselves out. And by us, I mean the media. By us, I mean America. By us, I mean historians. Why is it normal? Why is it the default to attack, kill, maim, murder, and rape Black people? That's not okay. And so I think calling out what's happening with Black people and hate crimes in the era, the post-Trump era, in the still backlash to the Obama presidency, is really important.
Thank you so much for that. And although we do stand in solidarity with other groups, we need people to stand in solidarity with us as well.
Definitely.
And many of our partners have, but we need more. Thank you so much, Dominique, for that answer. I want to, just get to the point of, you have made a career of asking, tough questions. But can you share what you personally think about why we have this rise in hate?
I do think it's backlash. I think it's backlash to the Obama presidency. And I think it is the emboldening of white supremacists and haters of all kinds. You see a rise in anti-Semitism. You see the API problem, API hate problem. These are direct offshoots of the impetus behind January 6th, the terror attack on American democracy, the attempted coup and overthrowing of our free and fair election. And the FBI said it. The number one threat to our domestic security right now are extremist white supremacist groups. Well, what comes with white supremacy? The terror against Black people. That's part of it. That's the package deal. Go all the way back to Birth of a Nation, and which is sort of the birth of Hollywood, the birth of our imaging, and the exporting of our imaging around the world was launched with terror against Black people. So when we go to the rise of fascism, white supremacy within the United States of America, which is not a liberal fantasy delusion anymore, we see it. The infiltration of police departments, of the military. I think we've got to take this very, very seriously, because part of that is the destruction of African Americans. To me, that is the reason behind the rise.
Thank you, Dominique. Really appreciate that answer. And now let's turn to Commissioner Mack. For those that don't know, the Civil Rights Department actually has the Human Relations Commission as a part of our operation, and your Human Relations Commission actually focuses on peace building and equity, and you've been doing this work for many years, and the commission itself has been doing this work for over 50 years. So I just really wanted to ask you, Commissioner, how is the Human Relations Commission meeting this crisis?
Thank you so much, Capri, and thank you for allowing me to join this conversation this morning among this distinguished panel, and on behalf of my commissioner colleagues that I've so proudly stand shoulder to shoulder with during this turbulent time in our history. And that's a great question. Before I answer that question, I want to just recognize you as well, all the work that you've done as far as building up the Civil Rights Department, very much needed. I like to call the department in our commission is the 1-2 punch, and it's so much needed. And we know all too well the hard work that's gone on behind the scenes to make this happen. So applaud you, I applaud my commissioner colleagues, and most importantly, applaud Mayor Eric Garcetti for actually greenlighting the development of this department.
Yes.
With that being said, that's a broad, open-ended question, of course. And I say that because there's so much that our commission does, and there's so much that behind the scenes our very small but mighty powerful staff does that supports our commission. If it wasn't for our staff, we wouldn't be able to do the things that we do. I can say that just loud and proud, unapologetically. So what we do first and foremost to address this is we listen, okay? We make it a point to listen to the communities that have been victimized, first and foremost. How dare I say that I'm an expert or our commission colleagues are experts when we meet, monthly to discuss, unfortunately, all these different forms of hate without speaking to those that have been victimized, right? We've got to go to Main Street and really understand what's taking place. And so once we listen, then we go, then we also convene with a number of our community partners, and just to get their thoughts, because they hear it every single day. We could run a whole program just to Robert alone in terms of what takes place. Capri can tell you all the calls. I'm sure they just over-inundate her call inbox at the radio station, And so we try to make it a point to really tie in with our community partners as well as listen to community to really get a good feel for what's taking place. And then from there, that's when the magic takes place. That's when we get with our staff, our proud staff that's under the umbrella of the Civil Rights Department. And they actually work with us to help put together projects and programs to begin this process, this peace building, and try to figure out ways to build, part of that project or that program may be, open dialogue with community. It could be in the form of, for example, the success that we had with the conversation between the community, the Black community, and LAPD recently. It could be in the form of what's taking place, what birthed out of California, Los Angeles for All, through our All program, which is very deliberate, in your face, and you've probably seen the posters, I know you've seen the posters, that have draped throughout our streets, proudly on the doors and windows of our businesses. So that's the way that we address it. So it's through listening, convening with our partners, the community, getting with our staff, building out these programs, projects, into a deliverable that comes in different formats.
Right. Thank you so much for bringing up the LA for Everyone campaign,
Absolutely.
the LA for All campaign, and the signs you were speaking of, the
Absolutely.
LA for Everyone banners that were all over the city. And we're very, very grateful that over 4,000 of those signs were all over the streets of Los Angeles, and we continue to have more interest in that space. You are a graduate of Morehouse College. And
Absolutely.
One,
Proud
I'm
tiger.
sure you're very, very proud. I'm surprised you don't have on the crimson and white today. But one of, just to know that that's one of the historically Black colleges and universities across the country, Morehouse, of course. And earlier this year, we had nearly 20 HBCUs receive bomb threats, including our very own Charles Drew University, which is here in Los Angeles. As a graduate of HBCU, how did you take that news, and what do you think should be done to protect these historic treasures?
Great question. I took it. It's frankly, it's absolutely appalling. I took it as a slap in the face.
It's a cowardice act. You know, if you have something, if you have as we call it in the neighborhood, if you have a beef against somebody, come forward and step up as a man or a woman and state it in our face. But for someone to do a chicken act, and let's call it what it is, Dominique said it's terrorism at its finest. It's terrorism. It's homegrown terrorism. It needs to be treated as such. What our commission stands, first of all, more needs to be done. More needs to be done on behalf of our government at the federal level. And we stand behind, as a commission, stand behind our federal government in terms of getting as aggressive as possible to remedy this. I'm not a security expert. You know, I don't have a firm that deals with security and, you know, tracking cyber attacks and all this stuff and telephonic attacks. But what I do know is this. When there is a lack of action in such a brazen threat as this, it devalues, as Dominique said, it devalues how you know, black folk, the way that we're looked upon. That's the way I take it, that our lives do not matter. And that's a problem. And so I would expect as much police presence, FBI presence on the campuses. These are our young leaders. And let's call it what it is. It's HBCU, but it's, you know, historically it's been just primarily just black students. But it's very diverse now, especially on the campus of like Howard University. It's very diverse. And so these are our future leaders coming from all different communities, all walks of life. Let's protect our future leaders. Yes. The same way as we were if these threats were coming in strong to a Harvard or Yale. We all know that if that was the case, the federal government and the police would be all over that campus day and night. So why isn't the same taking place to these 20 historic black universities? We need the proper security around our future leaders, our youth, our kids. It's very troubling to me.
Yes, definitely understand and feel that. And thank you for that, Commissioner Mack. For those that are just joining us, I'm talking with Community Build CEO Robert Sausedo, radio host Dominique Diprima, and Human Relations Commission President Anthony Mack about standing up to anti-Black hate. We all know that hate and racism are not problems for African Americans to solve alone. Nevertheless, we are constantly confronted with racism and bias of others. And my next question is for Dominique. Considering the challenges that we're facing, how do you build personal resilience to bring your full and authentic self forward, haters or not?
Well, for me, resilience, bounce back, if you will, is so important for me, and it's so important for our community, whether it's the children of those HBCUs, you know, who are really under an intense mental strain right now, or whether it's those of us in the media or working moms like you and me, Capri. Mm-hmm. For me, it's exercise. I work out, and the other thing that I do is I track good news. And those of you who listen to me on KBLA 1580 AM know every hour I'm like, what's good? I always ask what's good, because there's so many things that are good, so much progress being made, especially on the city, county, and state levels, as we're hearing about today, both grassroots community organizations like Community Build, city departments that are being put forth. We are seeing change. We are seeing more equity departments. We are seeing more civil rights initiatives by cities. And I think that never leads the news, because you know the saying, if it leads, it bleeds. Mm-hmm. So that means in the infinite sea of news stories that we could be focusing on, I feel like we have to intentionally choose to focus on some that empower us every single day, so that we are not just being inundated by all the bad news, which keeps the ratings high and which may not even be a good indicator of the trend line in what's happening in our nation around justice, around equity and inclusion, around people's, you know, understanding of history, and also my pet peeve that we have to know the difference between race, ethnicity, culture, and nationality, because that is so key for us knowing who we are and being able to understand who others are. And I think it eliminates a lot of the problems. So I think keeping my eye on good news, working out, and laughing at my dog and my kid probably are the things that help the most.
That's why you have kids.
That's why you have kids, yes.
But the other thing you do on your show, I'm a loyal listener, is you ask people what they can do, even if it is a problem or something negative, and you have a guest on, you always say, what can we do to help? It empowers the listeners, and I think you help to build resilience for your listeners by, not only hearing the problems, but being able to possibly do something about what's going on. So, Dominique, I have another question for you. I just really want you to ask, I just want to ask this quick question about, how we can build a culture for all people. How do you think we can make sure that anti-Black hate is, really taken seriously by all communities?
First of all, thank you for listening, Capri. And I meant to say laughing with my kid, not at him, in case he ever sees this. But look, I think that what you're doing is part of it. We've got to have the conversations. We have to make people aware. We tend to be led around by the news cycle, and we're very trendy. All of a sudden everybody's Black Panther, now everybody's Matrix. That's kind of our pop culture moray, if you will, of our society. So continually centering the truth, regardless of what's, allowed in school boards or what's, being practiced in Black History Month, centering the truth. And the truth is that attacks against all people generate from the same source, which is hate, white supremacy, fascism, whether it's anti-Asian hate, whether it's anti-Semitism, whether it's anti-Muslim hate. And so really we should be united in our resistance to this. I think the other thing is respect, showing mutual respect. You don't have to prioritize my needs, and I don't have to prioritize your needs. But we do have to respect each other and be willing to show up and respond to evidence and facts and data, not rumors, innuendo, and prejudice.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Really appreciate your insights. Next question is to you, Robert. You are on a community level. How do we build resilient communities where people are able to rise above hate?
As I'm listening to the other guest here today, the word that comes from their discussion is passion. I wish I had the passion today that Dominique has exuded this morning about this subject. And she's always very passionate about what she does. So passion. The other thing is, and forgive me, thank you for having me on this show, the gratitude. If you notice from the guests, the gratitude in being here. And I think we've lost those two senses in our community, passion, gratitude. I think we have to call out benign neglect, things that exist in our community, and that's a term that was very popular in the late 90s, early 2000s, and what it deals with is the passivity of dealing with issues. So for example, on one part of town, you might get sanitation services, and when a group in South LA makes a phone call, maybe they're not getting the same level, form of benign neglect. We've got to call it out. To continue to have the resiliency that we need, we have to also remember that silence is consent. We bear a responsibility as a people to stand up collectively and corporately and call things out as they are. And to the degree that we don't do that, we're getting the kind of backlash that we see today. We have to go back to operating within unity. We have to eliminate the cancel culture from our own community and begin to self-love first so that we then lead by example and show others how they should demonstrate love to us in the way that we do to our own.
I love that. And thank you for reminding us that, evil will prevail if the good people do nothing. And so exactly. I just think that is so important. I really want to, just ask you that, a question about, how anti-Blackness exists in many forms. Aside from hate crimes, how else do you see anti-Blackness showing up in the city?
Certainly. So I used the term benign neglect earlier, and we see it in career opportunities. We say that we want to go out and get certain developments where we have a certain community participation, but it never really happens, right? Housing is a great example of how this continues to happen. So everyone's concerned about gentrification. But what happens is when developments happen in our community that are affordable housing or low income, there's this system where it's like a lottery. So we have whole buildings of people that have moved into our community that are not from our community, don't look like our community, and we've been shunned from that because the process hasn't been held properly. So we've got whole swaths of South LA, for example, where you have people coming in. I call it a different form of gentrification because you have like-for-like income people coming in that look very different. So it's about a social change that's happening quietly. And so we see it in housing, but it's not new in housing, because if we go back to World War II and we go back to the freeway systems dividing our communities. So systemically in America, there is a truth that has to be addressed, and there's a reconciliation that must take place. And again, we must rise up in a way with our voices to say, we won't stand for this anymore. And we've got to hold our electeds and those who say they represent us accountable to these types of things. And lastly, when we go through, for example, the city or the county of Los Angeles, we have to ask the question, where do we have systemic racism or activities? So on one hand, we're talking about the police department and the changes they have to make. Well, we also have to look at the personnel department and how they make decisions. We have to look across the spectrum of all departments in every agency to say, are we punitively approaching this? Do our psychological profiles when we hire people look differently by community because of what they've experienced? Or are we applying something to everyone that maybe may not apply, which makes them unable to get a job or a career here? So it's about a real conversation. It's about being truthful and getting away from this concept of alternative facts. And then lastly, when we look at sustainability for ourselves, being committed. I think the community response system of South LA is a great example of how we have to collaborate. We have to support. When we built this model, we did it in a way where we would pull up smaller nonprofits. Just recently, Wooten Center, for example, is an agency that had stray bullets coming into their facility. So rather than me chasing dollars from my organization, I directed one of our funders, and now they're going to have some bulletproof windows put into their facility to safeguard the children. Now, I felt personally responsible because if a kid died there, I'd be responsible because I had a resource to help them. And that's the way we have to think. We have to sacrifice. We have to go back to the village mentality and raise these children up properly, bring our seniors back in and take them up from behind those closed doors after COVID and bring them back and make them an integral part of our community. That's what we've lost.
I love it. Systemic hate and discrimination demands this response, and I'm really glad that you're stepping up in so many ways because it's not just one issue that our communities are facing. And I cannot thank you enough for how you mobilize to have Chrysalis, the community response system of South Los Angeles, really step up and serve our community during one of the worst, crises of our time. So thank you so much for your leadership. I'm going to turn to Commissioner Mack. One of the keys to stopping hate in a multicultural city like Los Angeles is building solidarity against hate. How do we do that among all victims of hate, whether they are African American, Latino, Asian American, or otherwise?
That's a that's a great question. Frankly, it's a very complex question with that really needs to be addressed with a complex solution or answer. And I don't think it's just like one solution fixes the whole thing. But I think the first starting point that we've got to look at starts, frankly, if we're going to be honest, it starts with an apology. There's a lot of victims out there that deserve an apology from their oppressor. Let's just be frank. We can say this starts with, so that's where it begins. And then from there, I think you have to dig into, it's the educational piece. We have a lot of sick people out there, but we also have just a lot of, I hate to say, we just have a lot of ignorant people out there. You have folk running around there, and this is nothing new. Being the son of a longtime civil rights leader, I never would have guessed my wildest dreams we'd still be at this point. I don't want to give my age away, but many, many years later, right? And the thing's scary, even as we peruse through the minutes of our Commission of Human Relations, and we look at the names, the legendary names of leaders that have come before Robert and Dominique, and we read the minutes of the subject matters that they were focused on back then. They're the same subject matters today, right. And so it's a very complex matter, and it's even more complex today because now we have the whole mix of generational mix, right? We've got, what, four or five different, I've lost count, so many different generations. They're still in the pipeline working and very active in their communities and in society in general. And then, of course, layer on top of that the addition of social media and the impact that's having to really flame these fires. So it's going to take a complex matter. Thank God for our Civil Rights Department, Commission Relations, organizations such as Robert's, Dominique's. It's going to take a coming to the table of all these different organizations leaning on, as we're doing, as you know too well, on our staff to really put together a robust strategic plan. And can't, you know more than I do that's where we are right now with our commission. We're actually getting together to retreat and lay out a strategic plan that's not just a one remedy fix it all, but it's going to be a multi-leveled tier, and I love that approach because it's going to take a total from the grassroots all the way up to the city hall, to the mayor's office, and frankly to the federal government, frankly, to really begin to turn the tide on this and to purposely to benchmark and to have a measurement to really track not just what we see from our commissioner table, but what's Robert seeing, right? What's Dominique seeing in terms of those calls are going up in these areas of whatever type of brutality or victimization? Are the numbers going down from what she's tracking, from what he's tracking, from what he's seeing come through the door, from what we're seeing? So it's a complex matter. It's going to take a complex approach. I wish I had that silver bullet answer for you today, this morning. I do not, to be frank with you, because we're at the point where we're literally strategically outlining what that is. So.
Right. And just thank you for that. I think availability is the best ability. Tom Bradley would say that all the time. And that is something that the Human Relations Commission does and does very well for all communities. And even when I think about the LA for Everyone campaign that is being launched in partnership with the department and the Human Relations Commission, you have it in 18 different languages. Absolutely. So, simple Chinese, Korean, the languages are spoken by our Ethiopian and Eritrean, communities, and it's in Hebrew, et cetera. So I just think that that is a way to really, work on this. And I know you all are doing things as it relates to the anniversary of the civil unrest from 1992 with the Korean and African American communities. So thank you so much for your leadership. So.
One more point.
Yes.
See that point? I'm glad you brought that up. We've got to be deliberate in this approach, right? For example, Civil Rights Department, Human Relations Commission. I was thinking back, again, my father was around, and the leadership that he did and the staff to support his leadership, primarily just African American, in his office, right? Today, we have much more diversity, collected communities that make up Los Angeles County. I don't know the exact figures off the top of my head in the Crenshaw District, let's say, but back in 1969, I guarantee you there are a lot more of us in that community that are really movers and shakers, versus today, there's a change taking place. Well, we respond to that change in terms of the make of our staff, the make of our commission. Why? Because the communities that we're representing and we're trying to resolve these matters, they reflect a much more eclectic makeup. So that's part of that complexity. It's got to be meshed in with a solution. So
representation
matters. That LA for All campaign, that's a reflection of what every community. So that's the approach that's got to be taken.
That's great. Thank you so much, Commissioner. And to close, I want to give you all a chance to respond to my last question. What is the one thing you would like to see to stand up to anti-Black hate? Dominique, let's start with you.
Whew, that is a good one. I think the one thing that I would like to see at this moment in history is a comprehensive, unequivocal policy or set of executive actions coming out of the Biden-Harris administration. We voted them in. You said you had our back. To me, have our back. And it's so crazy because we had this anti-Asian hate bill. And I keep having to say over and over again on my show, it's an anti-everybody hate bill, because if you look at the bill, what it does is it gives resources to anti-hate crime initiatives on a local level. And those are for everybody. It's, everybody can call Commissioner Mack's department. Everybody can access civil rights. But because we called it anti-Asian hate, everybody says, well, what about us? We're still the number one. And so I'd like to see some, there's a whole long list of things I'd love to see. But I think a decisive and powerful set of executive actions coming out of that White House that addresses the anti-Black hate that we're seeing in education, that we're seeing in housing, and that we are seeing in our banking institutions, and that we are seeing on these streets. I'd like to see that yesterday.
Thank you so much for that. One thing I'm excited about is our department soon will be able to bring cases, discrimination enforcement cases against institutions such as banks and other places in commerce where discrimination has run rampant for many, many years. Commissioner, I'll get back to you in just a moment, but I think, Commissioner, I'll go to you next and have you help us with this question. What do you think we should do to stand up against anti-Black hate?
Well, I want to piggyback on what Dominique said. I would like to see from the federal government level on down, but want to add to it is we need to see consistency and solidarity. And across the board, from all affiliations, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's in our school system, housing, what's taking place as far as these threats to the 20 college campuses. We need to see consistency in terms of that our lives are of value and matter. And that's what's been missing for decades, for the past 400 years. And the scary part is if we continue on this track, 30, 50 years from now, the script is not going to change. In fact, it might just be worse. So if we don't get ahead of this right now and put into place a plan, but that's consistent across the board, whether what we just CNN late last night in New Jersey, we have a little scuffle that breaks out between a Caucasian young man and a Black kid, and the way that they were treated completely different. So all we're asking for is consistency. Show that respect, right? But in that master plan, it's got to go across all agencies. That's what we're looking for.
I mean, to that point, that's why we are asking for our voting rights bill.
Absolutely.
Can we get that, please?
Absolutely.
I mean, those are, because we can't push back locally, we can't push back on a state level against those policies and incidents that are happening in our communities if we don't have the right to vote. That's so fundamental.
That's critical.
Right. And as Mayor Tubbs said on one of your recent shows, voting is not everything. So we have to stay engaged even after the vote, because if people think, oh, you vote and that's it, then it's definitely a false sense of security in that space. So I just really want to get to you, Robert, and just to ask you, the same question, and I'll read it again, just to let you know, what's the one thing you would like to see to stand up against anti-Black hate?
Yes. So you've heard the civic response. I'm going to give you a slightly different one, but the answer's in the title of the show. I want to see people stand up. Because John Mack stood up, I was able to come and possibly be the next John Mack in the role that I am today. And I could pare that back in many cases, and that's actually the reason I took the job, right? Because he was my hero. And we've got to demonstrate that to people. But from a pastoral perspective, we have to go back to looking at what we're really dealing with, the spiritual wickedness of what we're doing, these strongholds that have been cast upon our society.
Say it.
And folks have to go back that if they say they're Christians, whether you're evangelical, Catholic, Kojic, whatever, we serve one God. And that one God has taught us how we should be responding to each other. He created humanity, not black folks, white folks, humanity. We created the racism. And so we've got to go back to looking inward and being very real about what we've been called to do and how we should be responding to each other in what some people would call ethereal, I call very real, and that's in love.
Absolutely.
We've got to bring love back to the table. We've got to live in it, demonstrate it, and make it a true value in our lives. A top priority, as you say, Tony. So that's what I want to see happen. As a pastor and as a community-based person, we get back to the basics. love ourselves first, lead by example, teaching others how to do so, and moreover, to what I said in the beginning of this statement, we've got to stand up against all of this buffoonery.
Oh, thank you so much. And I feel the pastor in you, so it's okay to preach. And by the way, we actually have a faith-based group that works with the Human Relations Commission that stands together against hate, and it's just beautiful to see all faiths come together, particularly when we have things that are happening at houses of worship. And I just think that the moral authority is definitely important in these days. I just really want to thank all the panelists for joining us. This was an insightful conversation. Thank you so much. And a special thank you to Channel 35 for hosting us, and for our viewers for tuning in. You can catch a recap of this conversation as well as resources for standing up to hate at civilandhumanrights.lacity.org. This is Capri Maddox from the LA Civil Rights Department signing off and wishing you a happy African American Heritage Month. Thank you.